When I look around in the world, what do I see? I see footprints that man have left on the sand while walking through time. I see fruits of our ambition, figments of our imaginations, and I ask myself, when will it end? When will it end? It is plain to see, universally this land is not bountiful as it was, simply because in his quest for success, nothing stands in man's way. All rivers run dry, soon the birds will fly, the mountains will be no longer high. And when I really think of it, I just wonder why, oh why. I see charity deplored, equal rights totally ignored, wisdom and ingenuity working in accord, simply to afford such inventions as thermonuclear warfare and environmental warfare. And I wonder now, where do we go from here? Prophets everywhere gaze upon the horizon and declare that judgment will come as the savage hands of unscrupulous men pile everything pass by. Time is running out as we eat and drink, species at the brink of being extinct. And I think no one can deny that the price of progress is high, real high. I see consciousness as great as today we live recklessly. Money make egos inflate and thereby create a turbulent state. I see a struggle between the sexes, new hang-ups and old complexes. Now the question is, right in context, what shall be next? I've already seen this world have come divided between race, color, creed and class. And some of the things the scripture predicts should fully come to pass. Soil that wouldn't bear children, making children to be a part of this growing mass. And I ask, if this is progress, how long will it last?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Pat Meschino. I'm a journalist based here in New York City. I'm also a board member with Tropicalfete, and I'm honored to participate in this year's Caribbean Authors Series. Tonight, we will be joined by Dr. Rudolph Ottley, based in Trinidad, who has devoted his life to documenting and writing about Calypso. But because this program is focused on Calypso, before we get into Dr. Ottley's work, we at Tropicalfete would like to acknowledge the passing of the esteemed, prolific Trinidadian songwriter, Winsford Joker Devine, who passed away early this morning. Mr. Devine has penned over 500 Calypsos, among them Machel Montano's breakout hit, Too Young to Soca, the Mighty Trini's Curry Tabanka, Crazy's Prophetic, In Time to Come, the Mighty Sparrow's Saltfish, and a humorous take on the royal family, Philip My Dear, and the song we just heard, King Austin's Progress, which is often cited as among the very best Calypsos ever written. Mr. Devine, you left us so much music for us to enjoy for decades to come. Rest in peace, and our deepest condolences to your family, friends, and loved ones. Now for our evening's guest, Dr. Rudolph Ottley, based in Arima, Trinidad, is an assistant professor at the Academy of Arts, Letters, and Public Affairs at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. If I read everything Dr. Ottley has accomplished as related to advancing the Calypso art form, and by extension, the culture of Trinidad and Tobago, it would take all the time we have here tonight. So I'm just going to highlight a few of his achievements in this brief introduction, and the others will undoubtedly be mentioned as our discussion goes on. Dr. Ottley has been a judge at various Calypso competitions in Trinidad and Tobago, including the preliminary round of the National Calypso Monarch competition and the semifinals of the Soca Monarch competition. He is a former marketing manager of TUCO, Tobago Unified Calypsonians organization, and he produced Carnival's Dimanche Gras show in 2018, I believe. In 2004, Dr. Ottley founded the Divas Calypso Cabaret International, the only all-female Calypso tent in the history of Trinidad's Carnival. Dr. Ottley has authored 13 books on Calypso, including his first book, Women in Calypso, right here, published in 1992, which looks at the role of females who contribute to the enhancement of the Calypso art form, but who were disrespected, ostracized, because they chose to be involved in an indigenous social activity. Women in Calypso Part 2 was published in 2008. Dr. Ottley's series of books, Calypsonians From Then to Now, Parts 1, 2, and 3, compiles interviews and profiles, examines the lives, trials, and triumphs of several of TNT's Calypso legends, some of whom have since passed on, including Roaring Lion, Pretender, Lord Kitchener, Ross Shorty Eye, Penguin, and The Mighty Shadow. Dr. Ottley's 3 most recent books are 2014's Amba Tyler Women, The Untold Story of Women in Calypso from Chanterelles to Calypsonians, 1838 to 2014. 2019's The History of the Calypso Tent in Trinidad's Carnival, and 2020's Subterfuge and Intrigue, The Formative Years of Tobago Unified Calypso Organization. Tonight we will be speaking with Dr. Ottley about the various books and endeavors in Calypso, but we'll focus on 2 of his more recent publications, the aforementioned Amba Tyler Women, which was a study of women in Calypso conducted to discern the factors that account for the centrality of women in the Gael of the barrack yards of Port of Spain, and the history of the Calypso tent in Trinidad's Carnival, an exploration of one of the world's oldest socioeconomic, sociocultural institutions, inclusive of the era of the barrack yard tents and the commercialized Calypso tents. So, Dr. Ottley, your work is so impressive, so informative, and it has been an invaluable resource to journalists such as myself and anyone else seeking a greater knowledge of Calypso and its evolution. So it is an honor to speak with you this evening.
Thank you very much, Pat, for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to share some of my views on Calypso and the history of the art form in general.
Great. Well, before we get into our scheduled program, the news of Winsford Devine's passing today is very upsetting and a great loss to the Calypso world and the music world in general. Tell us about Winsford Devine and his significance in your eyes to the Calypso art form.
Well, as a Calypso writer, he would definitely exceeded the expectations and the skills of many of those who claim to be Calypso writers. For his longevity in the business, for the successes he had in terms of the kinds of Calypsos he produced over the years, for his commitment to the art form all these years, despite the lack of rewards. And then when we look at the repertoire of Calypso hits, as you mentioned some a while ago, with King Austin's Progress,
Mm-hmm.
to me, one of the better calypsos, we've had in the annals of the calypso history. So yes, Winford will definitely be missed. He's really contributed. Over the last couple of years, he was awarded an honorary doctorate from the University of the West Indies, which is, to me, is a small token for a lot of work that he did. But it is still good to know that he was recognized in his lifetime,
Yes.
because he really contributed to the art form.
Yes, he absolutely did. And I think Calypso, even I have a lot of friends and colleagues that do not really listen to the music that much, but I think there is, whatever form of music you're into, whatever kind of writing you do, I think there's a lot that can be learned from listening to these great calypsos. And Progress is one of those calypsos that I have been listening to for years and years. And in just reading the lyrics again just now as they were on the screen, it's just like, this is just genius, and it's just so moving and written so long ago, but so applicable to where we see ourselves in today's society.
And that goes back to the point that calypso is really poetry. And if you analyze Progress in a poetic manner, you would see it fits in with any worldwide or world-renowned poet in terms of the style, the structure, the stanza, everything about it. So it's really poetry in song, really, and therefore Winsford really captured that in his work.
Definitely. Now, for you, before we get into the books and the tents and the various things, you're in Trinidad, in Arima, Trinidad, and the borders have been closed there since March 2020. So it's coming on a year and a half of that, and just wondered what the overall mood is like in Trinidad. There is a date for reopening, so that must give some hope on the horizon, but just to get an assessment of what things are like there.
Well, it's a very somber mood, somber in the context that, we are a very vibrant, interactive society, where we mingle a lot, we socialize a lot, we rhyme a lot. And
yes.
that has been curtailed since March 2020. So that it's obviously creating some levels of anxieties, both in terms of how we operate. But, we're hoping for the best, and maybe very soon, within the next 2 months or so, we should have our borders open, and hopefully with the vaccination program taking place, more people will be vaccinated, and therefore that may afford the government the opportunity to open more of the or limit some of the restrictions that they've placed on the society. And before I go on, though, I just want to mention, though, that although I live in Arima, I always have to say I am from Chinapu village in Mofa,
Okay. Oh, okay. Sure.
which is one of the outskirts out of Port of Spain. And it's important that I say that because of what Mofa and Chinapu represents for me and my family.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. Well, it was there that you first were introduced to Calypso by your father, what I understand. And you mentioned that in your book, in your first book, Women in Calypso. And, would you say that meeting with the music at such an early age, I believe you were 5 years old, is that what set you on this path in your life to be this documentarian of all things Calypso, and making the wider world aware of the history of this music and the evolution over the decades, over the centuries now that it's been around?
Yeah, that was, I wouldn't say that, it was established or strategic meeting or discussion I had with my father. It's just that during every Christmas session or Christmas season, my father will go hellbound looking for whatever Calypso records were released for the carnival. But at that time, there were mainly 2 albums that would have been available, Lord Kitchener's album and the Mighty Sparrows album. And once he acquired those, he will come and he will call me, and we'll sit by the radiogram and he will play them. And after a while, I was able, at 5, 6, 7, sing all the songs. and I grew up with that experience. So I looked forward every year for him doing that. And as I grew older, my interest, developed in for trying to find out who's a Calypsonian and what is a Calypso? Why do these people only come out at this time of the year? And all of these questions began to evolve in my psyche as to why it is that, in a country whereby we have all these Calypsonians, why it is that only a certain time of the year we only hear them on the radio. So from very young, I was always curious. I was very investigative in terms of that. And as I got older, I saw the opportunity in terms of pursuing those interests and those topics in relation to research. So I have been researching the art form and documenting and collecting items on Calypso, since the late 1960s. Wow. And as I mentioned a while ago to someone, but what's ironic about my research history is that most of the important documentation as it relates to Calypso history, I have discovered in North America. And some of the oldest archival records that I have, I collected in North America, which adds a little discussion point, but we could talk about some of that.
Are there particular regions or cities within North America that have been particularly rich with the, Calypso records that you found?
Definitely New York City, Greenwich Village. Especially in the 50s, Greenwich Village played a major role in the development of Calypso in North America, and in particular reference to the era of Harry Belafonte and the rum and Coca-Cola era, and those kinds of things. And therefore, at one time, if you wanted to be part of what we call the GQ or the in group circles, you had to go to Greenwich Village, because that's where all the major investors, bankers, and it's important I mention this because at that time, Calypso music was the music that occupied the New Yorkers. The North American people were into Calypso. That was their music. Rock and roll was now trying to find its space. Jazz was, still there, but everybody wanted to be a Calypso and you're a Calypsonian, and therefore you had people like Farrakhan, you had people like Maya Angelou, Nat King Cole. All these people sang Calypsos because that was the thing to do, and so that you when you talk about cities, New York played a very, very important role in the whole evolution of the Calypso in North America. Also, in terms of Los Angeles, when in the 1930s, Warren Lyon went to Hollywood and met with Rudy Valley, and they had a nationwide broadcast of Calypsos.
Wow!
And let's imagine, in 1938, you had throughout the North America, throughout the United States, a live broadcast on singing and discussion on Calypsos. So those are the shows that those are some of the historic things that have happened to Calypsos over the years.
Right. Exactly. And even the actor Robert Mitchum recorded a Calypso album. So unusual to think of, but yeah. And you mentioned Hollywood there. I know there were a flurry of these Calypso movies that were made, like Calypso Goes Bop, or all these things. They weren't necessarily featuring Calypso artists from Trinidad or even from the Caribbean, but there were references to Trinidad. There was a Club Trinidad in one of them. There was certain things that referenced real things, but they weren't the real artists. But nonetheless, Calypso was so popular that this title was used in these films as a way of attracting audiences, which is just amazing to think that that music from Trinidad was so big in this country, in the U.S. at one point, that these things were happening. And when I mention that to people, like, I made a post about it the other day, and some of those things, and many people are just so unaware of that. But I wonder, in Trinidad, I don't believe I know in schools at carnival time, there's Calypso competitions at various grade levels and so forth. But is its history taught? Like, for example, are your books part of any curriculum in the school? And if they're not, this is an outrage. They should be, because this is such a significant history to people's identity and their culture, and that their culture has made this significant mark in the world. Granted, it might have been, you know, a time before any of us were alive, but nonetheless, that it did that, you know, this is something that every child growing up in Trinidad and Tobago should be made aware of.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned that. And just a bit to go back to the movies. The first movie that used the term or the terminology of the music of Calypso was in 1938. And there are over 75 movies between 1938 and 2020 that uses some notion, some depiction, some snippet or some melody of Calypso. So we have done that in terms of the movies. But to go back to the question of history in the schools in Trinidad, that has been one of the real problems with our education system, because we grew up on a history whereby what was propagated was European history.
Mm-hmm.
So we know all about Columbus, and we know all about Drake, and we know all about Hawkins and all these people. And that is one of the motivators I had in terms of wanting to do research on Calypso, because I could have given you stories on Frank Sinatra, on Tom Jones, on Rudy Valley, on Elizabeth Taylor. But I couldn't find in my libraries in Trinidad enough information on Roaring Lion, or on the Mighty Sparrow, or on Kitchener. And I found that to be a real shame, and I took the responsibility in my small way to say, I am going to leave something whereby my children or grandchildren or their grandchildren can have a reference in some library where if they want to find out about the Mighty Shadow or Lord Shorty, there's a book or there's an article where they can read and understand a bit of who these people were. And therefore, you know, so we have not taken hold, and say we as a nation, but it goes back to a historic fact, and that Calypso was not recognized as real music.
Mm-hmm.
Calypso was perceived in the early days as what they call jungle music or animal music. And that stems from the fact that Calypso evolved out of the African experience.
Mm-hmm.
And if we go to the 19th century, we will recognize from about after emancipation in 1838, everything that was African in design, in nature, in structure, was abolished, banned, or prohibited. Mm-hmm. So there was a very concerted effort to ensure that the Africanism in Trinidad will not be retained. And Calypso fell into that category, whereby if you sang Calypso, you're perceived as an outcast, you're perceived as a nobody, you're perceived as the dregs of society, and therefore people did not want to associate themselves with you because you were Calypsonian. As a matter of fact, there's one famous poster from a club in Trinidad where on the door was written a sign, "No dogs, no Calypsonians."
Oh, wow. And
yeah,
what era would that have been from, like a sign like that to actually appear?
Actually, that was in the 1960s, you know.
Oh my God. It's not that far back.
It's not something like you will feel that it was in ancient Trinidad. No, it's a modern sign. Wow. Yeah. Uh-huh. And there were some locations or venues or dance halls or entertainment places in Trinidad and Tobago where they will not entertain Calypsonians or have them as performers. Right. And that is where you found that the role the Mighty Sparrow played in his early career, where he kind of broke those barriers because of his popularity, because of his skill, because of the fact that he was entertaining. He managed to break some of those barriers down. But in general, the average Calypsonian was not accepted in most of the concert halls in Trinidad. And therefore, so that you see, when you link that with the fact that yes, the history of Calypso is limited in terms of narratives and documentation, is because of the fact that people felt, and in that era, those early eras, that Calypso is not real music.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get involved in Calypso, you're wasting your time.
So, like back in the earliest days, and I mean, I know your book, the 2019 book about the study of the Calypso tents, and even the other book where you talk about the Amba Tyler, yeah, where you mention about the the barrack yard tense and commercial tense. Like back in those days, like where the earliest days of the tense, were the authorities actively trying to stamp out the music or lock up people who maybe were performing it or were attending it, like or just disperse the crowds? Like in terms of the authorities' views on it, was it actively trying to suppress the music from its physical spaces where it was performed?
Well, we need to go back a bit to answer that. As I said before, in 1838 was emancipation, and the former slaves were set free to create their own environment. Out of that sense of freedom and homelessness, which is very important because they weren't set free and given apartments or accommodation. They created what we call the barricade community. And within the barricade community, and I don't want to say community because that's a modern word, but within the barricade environment, they had what we call a gael, an area whereby they perform the African cultural traits, what they remembered, what they did. Within the barricades, there were two kinds of music. There was a kalinda music, which is really the basic background for the calypso structure. But accompanying the kalinda music was stick fighting. So there was kalinda music, and then there was a music we call Calypso. The Calypso music was a female song that only women in the barricade sang, but it was an obscene song. Now, in 1884, there was an ordinance passed by the colonial authorities called Ordinance 2 of 1884, which prohibited stick fighting, it prohibited drumming, and it prohibited anything that was African. So that is the first colonial legislation, not the first, but one of the major colonial legislation that was passed to subvert the Calypso art form. So from 1884 till around 1910, most of the kalinda singers who were at the time men were prohibited from being involved in their art. They went underground, they moved out of Port of Spain, some of them, and therefore that is where the Calypso began to spread within Trinidad. So they moved to other areas where they could have practiced. So they went into the rural areas like Diego Martin, San Fernando, Santa Cruz, Belmont, Toco, and these places. They went to those areas where they underground, they did their own thing, but they knew it was an illegal act based on the ordinance that was passed. In the interim, the women who sang Calypso, who also sang kalinda at that time, but also mainly sang Calypso songs, they continued with their practice. For some reason or the other, the colonials did not ban Calypso. Calypso song remained. And all after about 3 decades of that limitation on the men who sing kalindas, the men came back to the fore, but did not come back singing kalinda. What they did, they appropriated the Calypso female song. And they added to it the stick fighting kalinda chants, the battalion or battalion persona of the Calypsonian or the stick fighter to the Calypso. And that is how the modern Calypso was born. Okay. And therefore, and one of my obsession with making these points is to show that had the women not maintained the fact that they were interested in keeping their art form going, we may have had a different kind of music and not Calypso music.
Wow. So that's such an interesting point. Because my question I had for you is, with all in your studies of Calypso and your documentation and of all the angles you could have taken, all the approaches for your first book, you chose to approach it, women in Calypso. But what you just said, it really clarifies. I mean, you may have additional reasons for doing it, but that point there is so strongly made that, of course, if without the female contribution, it wouldn't have been the Calypso that we know. So therefore, your first book embarking on this lifelong study would be Women in Calypso.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, but, being that, again, that's such an important point to make, because as with most music, but certainly of the time Calypso started, which is, the first recordings were made like 1912, I believe, the instrumental, and 1914, the first vocal Calypso. So certainly in that time and through the 40s, 50s, 60s, even the heydays in the US, as you mentioned, it's such a male-dominated space. So for you to make your first book about women in Calypso, I wondered, what was the reaction to even people that you might have told that you were working on it, other than the women that you interviewed, but let's say perhaps looking for sponsors or perhaps just sharing with your colleagues, this is what I'm working on. What was the reaction to your first book publishing a study, interviews on women in Calypso? How did people react to that?
Well, it was in a sort of amazement, a sort of, why are you doing that? Because again, even in 2021, although women have really advanced within the art form, there's still some people who don't take women Calypsonians or women entertainers seriously. Mm-hmm. And therefore, when I started that book in terms of putting it together in 1989 and published it in 1992. And you mentioned something about corporate sponsors. Mm-hmm. That seemed to be non-existent in Trinidad even today. Mm-hmm. Most times, unless it's a political book or you have the right connection within the corporate world, they seldom support you. However, over the years, I've been able to get some corporate support from some entities, but it's not like it's a given. You have to almost beg. You have to go crawling at times. So that most of my books are self-published, and okay. It has created some anxiety sometimes with my wife and economics.
Sure. I'm sure.
But I prefer, and I think she will also prefer me doing that, investing in that, than in some other kind of nefarious activity.
Absolutely. But as you say, your point of earlier on about there being this dearth of information related to Calypso within Trinidad libraries. So this is your contribution, mm-hmm. To that specifically, but wider to your culture, and it, and then for people outside who have an interest and want to know more, there aren't so many places to look. So when we come across books like these, it's like a treasure, So we thank you for doing that. Let's see.
Before you go on, Pat, I just want to make another point about this whole thing about women, in particular reference to the Calypso tent. I don't know if you're going to go there,
Yeah, sure. If you want to go there now, absolutely.
Because, and the reason I think I don't want to forget the point is that in the context of some historians, I should say, and some people who are involved in the art form, there's a notion that women have only been involved in Calypso and the Calypso tent since 1935, when Lady Trinidad was the first woman to sing in a commercialized tent. Mm-hmm. And that is so erroneous because, as I mentioned before, from 1838, women were central to the Calypso tent. They were central to the Gael. They were central to all of the activities in the barrack yards. Mm-hmm. However, when the men appropriated the Calypso, the Chorizo, and turned it into what we call Calypso around 1910, 1912, a number of things were happening in the society. Number one, Calypso was further stigmatized as I want to say uncivilized craft. Mm-hmm. It was perceived as only vagabonds and hooligans were involved in it. And it was perceived as if you were involved in that activity, you were a lower member of the society. Mm-hmm. So that women who wanted to elevate themselves in the society could not afford to be associated with Calypso. Mm-hmm. So it was a voluntary option on some women's part to steer away from being aligned with Calypso. The other point, which is an economic point, in that early era, the early 1900s to 1930s, or even up to 1945, women in Trinidad, especially African women in Trinidad, had more economic opportunities available to them in terms of working as seamstresses, working as doing laundry work in the houses of the expats, working as polishers in garment manufacturing companies, working as maids. They had a variety of different choices of jobs that men in the society did not have.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, for the woman, and so it was so ironic, though, that although these women had all these opportunities of economic growth more than the men, it is one of the reasons why a lot of the Calypsonians and panists of the day were dependent on these women for support.
Mm-hmm.
And so you found a lot of women mind or economically upheld the livelihood of their men, because the men, especially the African men, did not have all these opportunities or a number of opportunities available to them in terms of employment. So it was a very interesting dynamic between employment and vocation, as opposed to being involved in what we call a cultural art form as Calypso. Women had to make a choice. Right. And they decided to do that, to pursue an economic interest, to support themselves, their family, and their man.
Mm-hmm.
So that later on you found that, and I'm saying this to bring the point over, that a lot of people have the view that there was a deliberate attempt by the society to marginalize women from the Calypso art form between 1912 and 1935. And I'm saying that is not necessarily the case. Women chose not to be involved in the art form because of the negative stigmatization of the art form and of themselves if they were perceived to be labeled as a Calypsonian.
So then what happened after 1935? Are you saying that attitudes began to change?
It began to change very slowly, because until 1935, we didn't have another woman until about 1944. I think it was Lady Beginner.
Uh-huh.
And then later on, we had Lady Irie. And in both other instances, because your men were involved in the art form, like Lady Beginner's husband was Beginner the Calypsonian, yes, and Lady Irie's husband was Irie the Calypsonian. So what they did, they brought their spouses with them. Mm-hmm. And therefore, as the women felt protected, those two women, because now their husbands were there. And even if they branded them as prostitutes or jamettes, their husbands were there with them, and it was like water on duck's back. So that even though women were visible in the Calypso tent in the form of Lady Trinidad, Lady Beginner, and Lady Irie, the society still perceived women, even up to 1966. Mm-hmm. When I interviewed Calypso Rose made it very clear that when she became a Calypsonian or was identified as a Calypsonian, her neighbors scorned her and her friends, or her neighbors didn't want to speak to her because they saw her as a Calypsonian and they perceive a Calypsonian to be nothing more than a jamet. Mm-hmm. So that in 2021, and I marvel in 2017, when the entire world was paying all this adulation to Calypso Rose and give her all her deserved honors. Mm-hmm. To see how she managed to survive all of the ridicule, all of the sarcasm, all of the vicious attacks that were made on her by her friends, her family, her religious groups, to have been so accepted in 2017. So that when we talk about women in Calypso Rose must be part of that discussion because of what she endured and what she has stood in terms of time and in terms of the sacrifices she has made to prove that women have a role, and not just a role, but a central role in the art form of Calypso.
Yes, absolutely. And as we see, up until, a couple of years ago, she's still breaking down barriers as the oldest woman to perform at Coachella, which is one of the big music festivals we have in the US. And she is the oldest person as a featured artist on that stage, which is incredible. At 78 years old, she did that. So I mean, it's in her spirit to just keep going and just keep breaking down these barriers for women. But I read something in one of your books where a tent promoter was saying that this is back in about 1965, that in downtown Port of Spain, like any person would be happy to be seen talking to the mighty sparrow. It would give them some status, you know, oh, you know Sparrow, yeah. But they wouldn't want to be seen talking to Calypso Rose, because that would be seen as someone you should not be associated with. So it's, you know.
That's the society in which we
live. Yes, exactly. Well, I want to ask a few more questions about Ambatila Women, the book. But if Alton can hook it up, I would like for us to play the song that inspired the title, Ambatila Woman by United Sisters. Thank you for that, Alton. Yes, Ambatila Woman by the United Sisters, and the United Sisters are the late singing Sandra, who passed away earlier this year, the late Lady B, I believe she passed away some time ago now.
2001.
2001, Tigress, and
Marvelous Marvel.
Marvelous Marvel, how could I forget? Yes, a beautiful song, very inspiring song. Now, Dr. Ottley, we have listeners from all over. Please clarify what the term Ambatila Woman means.
Okay, it's a word that stems from Batila, which is a patois or French word, Batila, which deals with battle, into battle. It's out of the Gael foundation, whereby stick fighting, you're into battle, and Batila, you're into the battle, and therefore what Lady B, because she's the key writer of the song, what she really was saying is that the women are in battle, and the battle not only figuratively or physically, but in terms of their whole support of the Calypso art form and all the things that they have to survive on the plantation and life in general. So she approximated the word Ambatila, meaning in battle, and added that Ambatila, meaning the female part of the battle.
Yes.
So it's women in battle, whether it's in the Calypso, on the plantation, or in work, or at home. Wow. It's women who are fighting for their rights, their rightful place, I should say, and for to maintain their integrity.
I love that song. I feel the I feel the strength coming through, and it also has this ancestral African.
Yes, and that's something. That's why it's from the days of the barricade and from the days of the Gael. It's from the bosom of the whole African experience after emancipation, where she's saying it's an ongoing fight, and although we're in 2021, that battle continues for women.
Exactly. Now, let me say full title of the book again, Amber Tyler Women, The Untold Story of Women in Calypso from Chanterelle to Calypsonians, 1838 to 2014. So you very well explained Amber Tyler Women. Now, Chanterelle, please, why should I even attempt when we have the expert here? Please, because I think people get more meaning knowing identifying what each term is. They will get more from it.
But it basically, out of the British colonial experience, we call the forerunners of the Calypsonians Chantwells, which was spelled Chantwell. That's the British version. But because of our French heritage and our patois in Trinidad, a chanterelle is really the female Calypsonian in French. So rather than use from Chantwell to Calypsonian, which if I had used Chantwell, some people would have interpreted to mean mainly men.
Okay. Yes.
So I used the French word to make it more distinct, because although there were female Chantwells, but with chanterelle is the female pronunciation for the French version of the chanterelle.
Okay, great. And so, with, as you said earlier, with such a dearth of information about Calypso in Trinidad, like, how did you begin researching a project like this, particularly, going as far back as 1838, when even 1938 is difficult to find materials? Like, how does one begin, like, piecing together what happened during that time?
Well, first I must mention the fact that the book evolved out of my doctoral dissertation.
Okay.
My doctoral work was Women in Calypso, and so that was the foundation of the book. After successfully defending the dissertation, I felt that I had to make the book more readable to the general public, because with dissertations you have all these academic things you have to put in there, and the focus groups and all the stories. And I felt that as relevant as they are, I will convert some of that information and make it a book for the general public. How I began, again, because of my interest in history, it had to begin with emancipation, 1838, because that is when any iota of a society or of a nation really began after emancipation. And another reason for 1838 is because, as I said before, that is when the freed Africans had to now forge their own identity, their own space, their own whatever they had available in their space. They had to utilize to create a survival mode, of a survival technique. And within that development, this is where the barricades developed, the gael developed, the calendar developed, the chorizo singing developed, the drumming developed, the pilau and the food and all the things developed. And so that information on that period is very much available in terms of some of the British colonial history books, the colonial library in Britain, Folkways in the US, the Library of Congress in the US. You have lots of information on emancipation. What became critical in my research too was specifically finding information on the female chanterelle, or the female stick fighter, or the early female Calypsonians. Because at one time, there was hardly any discussion on Lady Trinidad in Trinidad. Most people felt that Calypso Rose was the first female Calypsonian. So we had to deal with that mythology. And then when as the research unfolded, we found, we had Lady Trinidad, we had Lady Beginner, Lady Irie, and then later on, we had Calypso Rose. And within Calypso Rose, there's some ladies who really contributed, but we seldom talk about. People like Lady Excellence, Lady Jane, Calypso Princess, significant lady in terms of that whole era. Lady Judy, Lady Afro, and most importantly, and we come to the 70s, a lady who is still with us today, Twiggy, who is now one of the longest survival female Calypsonians, and I say survival not in the sense of just being alive, but being an active singer, been an administrator, been an integral part of the Calypso organization. And she has been there since the early 1970s. You know, so that we get a rich body of information on women, except though that you have to dig, you have to search. And what I did, and I felt that it's important to do, within Amber Tyler Woman, you have the history from 1838 to 2014 of all that you want to know about women who were involved. And in certain parts of the book, you have a listing of the women when they came into the business, the songs they sang. So that this is, for me, this is my contribution to our national archive.
Definitely. Well, great. I think we would take another musical break to listen to Calypso Rose, her song "Leave Me Alone," which definitely continues that spirit of strong women. More recent song, I believe it's from 2018 or 2019. Dr. Ottley, you can correct me on that.
2017.
17, okay. And yes, it was a big hit for her. Got some good deal of international attention. So, Alton, whenever you can.
Yeah, it's Calypso Rose, the Calypso queen of the world. Manu Joe Marshall Montano. Here we go. Hey.
Boy, don't touch me like you're going crazy. Let go me hand. Let me jump up in the band. I don't want nobody to come and stop me. Leave me, let me free up. Myself, let me jump up. So leave me alone. I am going home. So leave me alone. I am going home. Let me party, let me party, let me party, let me party.
If we let we party, we having a ball. Nobody can stop we. No, not at all, I'm not chanting. Ay, ay, ay. When you see me, and the music hit me, ay, ay, ay. I just break me, getting on bad with somebody. So when you see me in the line, no matter what the time, I ready for the pumping. From back in the day till I hold and I pray, I prepared for the jumping. If you're 15 or 25, if you're 50 or 75, once you're breathing and you are alive, it's all we whining all day.
So leave me alone. I am going home. So leave me alone. I am going.
Look, once I have strength in the feet.
Thank you. That was great. And I want to get to your book about Calypso tents, your 2019 book. But before that, I mean, you are the founder of a Calypso tent. In 2004, you founded the Divas Calypso Cabaret International. And it's the only all-female Calypso tent in the history of Trinidad's Carnival. Is that correct?
Well, it's the second. It was not yet, it exists as the only one now, but it's the second time that such an event here was attempted.
Okay. When was the first one?
1992.
1992. Okay.
Yeah, there was one called Queens of Calypso, Carnival 1992. They were stationed at the Roxy Cinema, but again, because of lack of support, financial and otherwise, they folded up after that.
Now, has your tent been staged annually each carnival since 2004?
Yes, thank the Lord for that. Yes, we've managed to survive every carnival with all the trials and tribulations, but we are committed to the cause, and the ladies, they're very committed to it. So we are here doing it, getting stronger every year.
And like the amount of females, like from 2004 to where up until, I guess, the last carnival was 2020. In that time span, have you seen more women wanting to be a part of the Calypso art form? Less? Has it fluctuated? I mean, what are you seeing in terms of female interest in Calypso?
Okay. From my, as I said, since the late 60s, early 70s, observing the Calypso art form and women's interest, women have always been interested in being part of the Calypso art form. The problem had to do with the tent managers or tent management, who in the 70s in particular, unless you were female who brought something different to the tent in terms of you were whiner girl, or you had a sexy persona, or you were white like Denise Plummer or Lady Complainer, or you had to be extremely different for them to want to bring you to the tent to be part of their cast. So that when I went every I go to the auditions in the various tents, and in most times you have equal amount of women vying for places in the tents. But historically it has been that if 10 people are selected, there might be 1 female and 9 men selected. And the history has shown between 1973 till about until 2000, most of the Calypso tents in Trinidad in 1973 had 1 or 2 women as Calypsonians.
Okay.
In the late 80s, it improved a bit, where you may have had 4 or 5. But when you look at the numbers in relation to the auditions, you will have had 50-50 in terms of men and women auditioning for positions. But those being selected always was the lower number of being women who were selected. And what has happened over the last 10 years, though, is that most of the tents now, it's almost 50-50 in terms of the number of women as opposed to men as Calypsonians during the tent. That has reflected in the Calypso competitions, because in the 1970s, when you had, let's say, for Fiesta in particular, when you had 24 contestants at Calypso Fiesta, which is the semifinals, you would have had 3 women: Calypso Rose, singing Diane, singing Francine. Now, on other occasions, you may have had Lady B or Buzzing B or somebody else replacing them, rotating. And then when you go to Calypso King competition, that it was called then, you had either Calypso Rose singing Francine or singing Diane. Now, what has happened since 2000 is that with Calypso Fiesta, which is the semifinals, we have at least 40 to 45% of the 40 contestants are female. As a matter of fact, in 2017, and out of the 40, it was 50% male and 50% female.
Wow.
And that has been as a result of the fact that the management of the tents have become more open and accepting of females as Calypsonians, and therefore they're more willing now to take the chance of including them in their Calypso tent cast that they select. And so that you found, for example, in the last carnival we had 2020, in relation to the Calypso Monarch competition, the first 3 places were females.
Right.
Terry Ann Lyons, followed by what's the girl, Karina Ashe, and then third was Heather McIntosh. Now, 20 years before that was unimaginable.
Right, exactly.
And so that it has definitely had an impact in terms of the last 20 years, and I don't want to take any credit for that, more than to say that what we have done at the Divas, we have created an opportunity, a space, whereby every year we employ at least 17 to 20 women who, for the 4 weeks of Carnival, have an opportunity to hone their skills, to earn some money, and to contribute to the Calypso development and to Carnival. So I think some of the tent managers have piggybacked on that a bit, so that so we are continuing to fight our fight. It has not been an easy fight, but we are struggling on.
I know it's probably too early to predict like what Carnival 2022, if it will happen, or what it would look like if it did happen. But do you plan to have a tent in some form, or it's just too far away with not knowing what restrictions might be in place to kind of make that call at this point?
No, ironically, we had a Zoom meeting, our cast had a Zoom meeting last Saturday, where we discussed that same notion as to how are we going to go forward with or without Carnival.
Mm-hmm.
And we unanimously agree that we are going to go forward in some format to keep the name going, to keep the whole vibe of the tent going. So yeah, we're going to have something. As a matter of fact, before the end of this year, we are going to have a large reunion kind of show. And then if there's Carnival, we're going to do some more. So yeah, we are not going to allow the name Carnival or the whole event of Carnival continue to prohibit us from performing or being relevant in the entertainment business.
Right. And overall, like through your book about the Calypso tent, and I want to give the exact name of it, well, the history of the Calypso tent in Trinidad's Carnival. Through your researching of the tent, I mean, you know, as Calypso was at one time the soundtrack for all Carnival celebrations, and Pan as well, you know, being that the two dominant forms. Now both have taken a backseat to soca, kind of runs the show these days, but these other musics are definitely there, but not, you know, it's soca, the dominant music, the younger generation, as Calypso was the music of a younger generation at one time, you know. But I wonder, like, so for the study of tents in your book, are they, you know, have some had to close because of less patronage than there used to be, or have you looked at ways to increase the presence of Calypso in Carnival, you know, as the years go on, like to let people know, like, hey, this music still exists and it's vibrant. It's not just relegated to one point in history, but we still have great Calypsonians making music that's worth hearing. So that's a couple of questions in there, but yeah, I'm sure you can decipher what I was going for. The economic returns for the tents, you know, surely must be scaled back from when they were in their, when Calypso was in its heyday. So there's that part of it, but then also what ways, as a tent operator, as a Calypso enthusiast, what ways can you help to highlight the music in a way so more people will want to hear it?
Okay, I think it's more than just an answer. It has to be almost a historical review of the Calypso tent. Mm-hmm. One of the things that one of the things we did not do in Trinidad over the years was to introduce children to the Calypso tent. Going to the Calypso tent was an adult activity during Carnival. Mm-hmm. And therefore, children of all generations became familiar with the Calypso tent when they became adults. When you look at the society from independence to, let's say, 2000, there were limited Carnival activities. You go to the Calypso tent, you went to a party, or you had a small family gathering, or you play mass. From around late 90s, but mostly in 2000, the society became totally engulfed in Carnival-related bacchanalia. And I'm saying that in the context of boat rides, Carnival boat rides, Carnival picnics, Carnival jamborees, Carnival, everything was happening, right. Everything. Added to that, we had a significant rise in our social disconnect in terms of crime in the society. Mm-hmm. We also had an aging population who had visited the Calypso tents over the years. Mm-hmm. And remember I said the young people weren't introduced to the Calypso tents.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Coinciding with that, you had the emergence of soca, mm-hmm. which we are all responsible for. We, and I say we, the people in Calypso, we pushed the soca artists out of the Calypso tents. Mm. Mm-hmm. Some of the veterans of the day frowned on the fact that young soca artists were singing in the same Calypso tent as they were. So from very early, we had to deal with that dichotomy of how we perceive our music. And therefore we labeled Calypso as adult or old people music, and soca as young people music.
Right.
Now, with an aging society, obviously with more aged people, the dominant people who are going to come to the tents, as I said, unable to do so now because of their age, and therefore the soca music has taken over the carnival and not the tents, because we push them out of the tents. We don't want them in the tents. Now, if your population are going to the tents or the older people, obviously your numbers are going to dwindle. Obviously, you're going to have economic issues in terms of how you survive with the tent. And then we also had some ethnic issues in the context of, you know, some Calypsonians had their own ethnic base, and they sang songs that may have offended some people from different ethnic groupings and all that. So you have all of those combination of things happening. But the major thing is that the Calypso and the tent management did not address the changes in the society that were taking place around Carnival. We kept it traditional.
Yes.
Whereas the Carnival product, the Carnival ecology changed and was changing around us, and we did not pay attention to it. Because for us, I would say, we felt that Calypso tent had certain kinds of umbrellas, certain kinds of avenues, certain kinds of practices. And if you change it, then you're going against the tradition of the tent. Now, if you're a traditionalist and your market share is dropping, your attendance is dropping, the entire society is evolving, and you maintain that traditional approach, obviously it's going to negatively impact on your existence. And therefore, when we see in 2020, which was the last year of the carnival, the dwindling numbers and some tents having to fold for a week or two, or cut staff or cut the numbers, it is because we did not address the fact that we became too rigidly traditional. How we move away from that is that we have to address that whole concept of what a Calypso tent should be in the 21st century. Do we need to have a tent of 40 Calypsonians on one night? You know? Shouldn't we not do as the Young Brigade tents did in the 70s, where they had the humorous skits and pan players and, you know, mix the product? You know, do we add a Zoom component to the tents, whereby the same elder adult market that we have lost because they don't want to come out in the night, or they don't want to risk the travel at night and those kind of things.
Sure.
But provide them in your bedroom with the apps. You know, get an app whereby you can stay home, you contribute financially, and you be part of the Calypso tent.
Right, it's a great idea. Sure.
You know, so we have to look at ways in terms of how we untraditionalize. You know, some of my friends wouldn't like to hear me say that, but how we move away from the traditional concept of the tent and modernize it to fit the 21st century carnival ecology in Trinidad.
Right, exactly. But I mean, if it were that traditional, it would still be in a tent, like what we know as a tent. So obviously things do evolve, and what you're saying only, you know, it's only makes sense and dollars and cents. But I wonder if these things, is this what some of the things you're implementing in the Divas tent?
We have traditionally, I say traditional, but we have since our inauguration, we have always added a different component or different components to our shows. We have always had characterization of our performers. We have had skits, we have had limbo, we have had pan players. And therefore, what our goal is that when you come to the Calypso, to the Diva show, you just don't sit and hear Calypso's whole night. Now, that has created some challenges amongst my own cast members.
Wow.
who want to be in a Calypso tent in the traditional way and who want to come and sing. But for us, we offer you a package, an entertainment package that is inclusive of Calypso singing, pan playing, limbo dancing, humor, poetic reading, and all those things. And that's how I think that's one of the reasons why we have managed to survive. We have been able to bring a different branding to the product of the Calypso tent.
And have you been in the same location for all these years, or have you moved?
No, we have moved. We have moved. We started off at the Trinidad Hilton poolside, and then we went to the Mascam pub, which was really our base for most of our years. But then the Mascam Mascam pub was destroyed by a fire. I think it was 2015 or 2016. And since then, we have been at Calypso Blues. One year we were at the Monarchs on the Avenue, and then we have been at the Calypso Blues Cafe on Rice Road the last 2 years.
Okay, and will that be your home for whatever you do in 2022?
All things, yes, all things equal, yes, we hoping to.
Okay, great. That's good. Now I want to ask you, you know, in terms of like broadening Calypso beyond Carnival, where possible. No, October, I don't know if it's still practiced in Trinidad, and obviously, you know, not last year, but October is observed as Calypso month. And I just wonder, like, you know, that would seem to me to be could be a very good tool for highlighting Calypso in all facets of Trinidad life, but also, you know, to an international market, there could be some enticement as well. You know, like, this is outside of Carnival, you're going to get the most Calypso this time of year. I wonder, like, what that month, as it is now, like, it probably hasn't been maximized to the benefit it could be to Calypso music overall. And what would be some of your thoughts about ways that it could do that, in fact, be more of an offer more appealing Calypso-related events, concerts, even dialogues, like, you know, this type of thing, you reading from some of your books, like all kinds of things related to Calypso. Like, what do you see as ways that could work to help, you know, to help the art form outside of Carnival?
Okay, I think one of the things that I would like to see is, although it's important to celebrate Calypso History Month, I feel it almost duplicates a notion that people have of Calypso. It is segmented, it is for a specific purpose.
Okay.
So that when you say Calypso History Month, okay, so the whole of October, we give you all kinds of Calypso. And then what happens in November and December and January and February? You know, so I have a little issue with that, but I understand the value of it. And I think October Calypso History Month, just as the organization TUCO is doing, you know, you have your celebratory month where you honor people and you do those things. But what I would like to see is that where we can get the organizations out of Trinidad, for example, I know in Toronto, the Ontario Calypso Performers Association, they also celebrate Calypso History Month. And if we could get the same done in New York and all the other cities where there are Calypso or diaspora carnival people, to do that, so that again we invigorate the whole context of Calypso as world music. Mm-hmm. That, you know, so that rather than make it, you know, so segmented that it's just in October, but to make it prolific and to make it more widely spread, it is whereby we have to get the media, and I say the media, the people who are in charge of programming at radio stations and television stations and all the online stations. How do we get them to recognize the importance of Calypso music? And not only get the importance, but to get them to buy in and get their sponsors to have daily segments of Calypso. I remember when I was growing up, you know, we used to have on a Sunday a Calypso hour or Calypso. Every hour they would play 2 Calypsos. But even, and that was, I used to frown on that. But today we don't even have that. That will be so magical now if every hour or every station they play an hour of Calypso. I mean, that will be wow.
Right.
You know? So that is how I will like to see the media being involved. And not only wait until October, where they give you an abundance of music of Calypso, and then after that you have to wait until Carnival, or until the next October comes around. Or, sadly enough, like today, Winsford Devines passed away, and you had all the radio stations playing compositions that were made by Winsford Ewings. Where were those music players all the time?
Exactly.
You know, but when Shadow passed away, you had 2 weeks of Shadow music.
Yes.
But for the last month, I haven't heard a Shadow song on the radio. You know, so it's that kind of part-time, as Stalin would say, that kind of part-time love we have for our music that really irks me. But I'm saying, I think the government of the day, as is done in Canada, must make it mandatory that all media must play a higher percentage of local music. And I'm not saying this only for Calypso, because we have chutney, we have parang, we have rap, we have rapso, we have every genre of music, but local music. And think that, but for some reason, governments come, governments go, they are all afraid to deal with culture in a serious way, in the context of mandating that this is what should happen. And I said Canada is the ideal example and model, because with their Calgary Heritage Festival and those things, they're very serious about those things. You know, and they mandate that you must play 45% Canadian music. When you bring an artist to do a show in Toronto, you must have Canadian accompaniment. You know, we don't do that. You know, we bring all kind of artists here now and then. You may throw in one person.
Right.
You know, so unless we get that cultural will, that political will to say this is an important investment, just as how we invest in oil and gas, we have to make sure we invest in culture. And investment does not mean giving a prize or giving a car. That's not investment. That is given an award. We talk about where you take $100 million and say, I'm going to invest in Calypso in terms of training the artists, training the musicians, building schools, building entertainment centers. You know, that is investment. You know, and until we reach that point, you know, we're going to continue talking about it and discussing it and go back to the good old days.
So does it take a person such as yourselves who have been immersed in culture for, you know, your entire adult life and have produced the body of work, you know, that has taken this music around the world as much as the performers have? Like, does it take people like you and to lobby government? I mean, what are the steps to go from talking about it to actually seeing it happen?
I think it has to do, it's a societal commitment. It won't take one person or one Calypsonian or one government. You see, that in my limited view, the society still has not recognized local culture as important. And I don't want to limit it to Calypso, even the steel pan.
Yes.
We still have not addressed and say, hey, this is ours. And if it's like our children, how you protect your children, how you guide them, how you invest in them. We still see our culture as bastards. We still see our culture as non-belonging. We still see our culture as orphans. Until we accept culture, our local cultural idioms, as belonging to us, as if we have birthed them, as if we have gone through 9 months of pregnancy with them, as if we had, you know, taken them away and said we are going to ensure your life is better. Until we do that, the talk will continue. Because the society, the entire society must buy into it. But culture in this society is still seen as something seasonal, something frivolous, something only for enjoyment, not fully understanding that without the culture of this country, we would have been in a less deplorable state than we are now.
Absolutely.
Which is so evident now in this pandemic, whereby we see how people who have understood the culture of Trinidad and Tobago, who have been able to interpret and internalize what we have gone through as a cultural people, how they have managed to survive better than those who have not. You know, and that's a long story, but I don't want to get into that yet.
Okay, sure. I wanted to just quickly touch on your book, the 2020 book about TUCO, the Trinidad United
Subterfuge and Intrigue.
Yes, exactly, which I think we have that covered. But now their role in all of this, like as the body that represents Calypsonians. I know they've been around a very long time. I know you served as a marketing manager, I believe. So what can they do? Or, there's that body, there's the Tobago, there are these bodies representing the different Chutney Association, all this vibrant, all these diverse, vibrant musics that come from Trinidad and Tobago, but you come together, that's a lot of, that's substantial to make this play to the government. But specifically in your profile of Tuco, like what is their role in all of this in lobbying for Calypso? Like, how do they operate?
Well, the Tobago Unified Calypsonians Organization, which was founded in 1993, their role and responsibility is to really oversee, govern, and take care of the interests of Calypso and Calypsonians. Mm-hmm. I think somewhere along the line, they have lost their way in the context of not seeking the affairs of the Calypsonian. Why I'm saying that? You see, before Tuco, there were other Calypso organizations. There was the Calypso Association, and there was the Trinidad and Tobago Calypsonians Association. All of those other organizations were formed as trade unions. Okay. Now, if you're a trade union and your members are involved in Calypso competition and so forth, they should be able to come to you in terms of where there are issues. Mm-hmm. How could you therefore then be an organization, a trade union, and still be part of the National Carnival Commission who governs the Calypso, who governs the carnival? You see, on Trinidad and Tuco and the NCBA, they, unless and until they detach themselves from the National Carnival Commission, those special interest groups will continue to be nothing more than appendages of the NCC. Mm-hmm. And I think they have not really recognized the fact that the NCC Act of 1990, whatever, 93, I think. The population, the Calypso fraternity, the Carnival fraternity, seriously needs to address with the minister and with the government an in-depth look and review, and where possible, make changes to the National Carnival Commission Act as it applies to the special interest groups. Mm-hmm. You cannot have people representing their organizations as special interest groups and still be part of the National Carnival Commission. Which master will they serve?
Right, exactly.
Are they serving the entire carnival community, or are they serving only Calypso?
Right.
Or are they serving their own personal interests? Mm-hmm. And I'm saying that in the context that we had models before. The Carnival Development Committee may have had their issues and may have had their problems, but when they represented Carnival. And if you're a Calypsonian and you had an issue, you go to the NCDC to complain. If you're Calypsonian now and you have a problem, you go to Tuco. Tuco cannot, or most times, will have challenges deciding or determining what happens because of their affiliation and their commitment and their link to the National Carnival Commission. So there's a conflict of interest. Mm-hmm. Added to which, Tuco has now become heavily involved in the marketing of Calypso tents. Now, as a business entity, I don't have a problem with that. Mm-hmm. I have a problem, though, when the tents are competing and obviously trying to erode and destroy private tent enterprise. Uh-huh. Because Tuco tents are mainly supported by government subvention through the NCC. These private-owned tents may get some support from Tuco, but it's not guaranteed. Okay. And therefore, what happens, a lot of the Calypsonians, because of the guaranteed pay week with the Tuco tents, they gravitate to the Tuco tents.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And therefore, in a society whereby the majority of Calypso tents, well, not the majority, but a number of them were owned by private enterprise, you have now whereby there are very few Calypso tents in Trinidad that are owned by private individuals, whereby most of the tents in Trinidad in particular are run by Tuco.
Wow.
So your administrator, your marketing, so you're competing against yourself, and then you align to the National Carnival Commission.
Right, exactly. So
Seriously.
your tent would be an example of a privately owned.
Yes, we
tent.
have Divas, we have the Calypso Review, we have the Icons, and we have the Birds tent, which is being characterized as a community tent. So we have three kind of demarcations of Calypso tents. We have the Tuco tents, which, as I said, there are 6 of them. We have the community-based tents, which are like Divas and the Birds, and then you have other private enterprises like the Review and the Icons.
Okay.
But the bulk of the tents are run by the Calypso organization, which again creates a problem because you're a trade union.
Yes.
You're not supposed to be marketing or competing with your membership.
Right. Definitely.
But it's something that, you know, it's frowned upon. It's scoffed at when it is mentioned. So it is what it is.
Right.
But until the Carnival fraternity address the issue of the NCC and the NCC Act as it applies to Carnival and the special interest groups, we are going to go nowhere very quickly.
Interesting. All right, we're going to take one more musical break, and then we will come back and wrap up with you,
Okay.
Dr. Ottley. Thank you so much for your time this evening. And Alton, if you could play Talk Dust, The Tent Is It, since that's what we're talking about, that would be fantastic. Thank you. Whoop.
Did we lose the audio?
Yeah, we see Talk Dust, we just can't hear it, unfortunately. Well, Dr. Ottley, before we go, I would just like to ask you, where can people get your books who are not based in Trinidad? Is there any way they can get them online or mail order, or how can we get some of your books?
All right. And I know a lot of people have been asking me that, and it's a deliberate economic decision I made. When my first 2 books were online, I don't want to call the name of the facilitator, but it was not making economic sense to me in terms of the cost per price and the volume that were being sold. And since then, I recognized that it makes better economic sense to me to have my books in Trinidad, and unfortunately, that's the only way you can get them.
Okay.
I've deliberately stayed away from that. My next approach will be, maybe not now, but the next couple of years, was to do some electronic books and some Kindle. But I'm not prepared as yet for that.
Okay.
Because again of economics.
Right.
Because you see, had I been a sponsored publisher,
yes,
it would have been easier for me to go to one of those online markets and just have the book distributed there. But since as a self-publisher, it's important that I at least recover my investment in a more efficient time frame than having to wait for a longer period.
Exactly. And for those of us who maybe will visit Trinidad at some point, maybe for next year's carnival, maybe before, are they available? Are your books available at all bookshops pretty much throughout?
Pretty much throughout, yes. But my major outlet is a place called Paper Based. It's in Normandy Hotel.
Okay.
And or directly from me. Once you call me, I'll get it to you. Once you're in Trinidad.
Okay, fine. And finally, are you working on any other book now?
Yes. I am right. the pandemic has helped me to really put in some good work. I am working on a book which deals with the globalization of Calypso.
Oh, wow.
And talk about, well, I call it the, Calypso, the legendary journeys, where we're going to talk about how Calypso, without any strategic marketing plan or any governance body or anything of the sort, has traveled from Africa and back to Africa.
Interesting.
Along the way. And I'm also doing a revised version of the Calypso tents, the issue of the Calypso tents.
Okay.
Where I am doing the generic work, but I'm focusing on 3 major Calypso tents. The Calypso Review, which is a book I did in 2012, but I'm going to update that. The Spectacular Tent, Spectacular Forum, and also the Young Brigade tent, which had 3 different kind of components. It was normally it was first the Young Brigade, then became the original Young Brigade, and then it became Sparrow's Young Brigade. So those 2 pieces of work, and I almost forgot. I'm doing a film documentary on Amber Tyler Woman.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, so that is my major interest at the moment.
Yeah, and these are projects we maybe will see and read in 2022.
Ideally, I am looking at 2022, especially for the documentary on Amber Tyler Woman.
Excellent. Wow. Lot to look forward to.
So, Pat, if you know of any sponsors out in North America who might be willing to invest, you can always.
If I do, I'll be sure to let you know. Definitely. Well,
but one thing, before we leave, Pat, one thing I want to mention, I saw someone asking, why was the Calypso King changed? Why the title Calypso King changed to Calypso Monarch?
Okay.
Part of that happened in the it happened in 1976. What the Carnival Development Committee recognized is that between the period 1973 to 1975, Calypso Rose singing Diane, singing Francine, Buzz and Bee, they were in the Calypso Monarch finals. And they were Calypso King competition finals. And it would have been awkward for them to call the winner of the competition a female winning and calling him the Calypso King. So they changed the name in 1976 to the Calypso Monarch. And I just want to add something to that too. You know, the first person who won that new title was the mighty Chogdas in 1976 and repeated in 1977. Calypso Rose won in 1978 when the title was already Calypso Monarch. Because in some circles, there's the view and there's the narrative that is because of Calypso Rose being the winner of the crown that year, that the name was changed from Calypso King to Calypso Monarch, which is totally wrong. It was changed in 1976 to avoid that same thing happening, but Rose was not responsible for it.
Right. See,
it happened before Rose won.
I always thought it was the other way, you know, Rose had changed that. So
No, Rose had absolutely nothing. I shouldn't say she had absolutely nothing to do with it, but her presence in the competitions up to 73, 74, and 75, people felt sooner or later she would have won.
Right.
So they changed it in 76, but she didn't win in 76. She didn't win in 1977 either. She won in 78.
Yeah. And it had already been changed.
It had already been, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and so important for you to clarify these things. Thank you so much. And
you're welcome.
Thank you for your time this evening. Again, it's been such an honor to speak with you. We've all learned so much and feel so inspired. And, you know, hopefully we can see some of these changes in Trinidad to just a fuller appreciation for this great music that comes from there, that has done so much in the world to get more of a recognition at home, you know, and and you have played such a great part in documenting it and making people understand the greater, not only the evolution of it, but so many of the nuances within it all, you know, and it's invaluable to just be able to sit down and read these books and find out so much about this. So again, thank you so much for being so generous with your time tonight. And we look forward for the future projects to come from you.
Thank you very much, Pat, and thanks for inviting me and selecting me to be part of your wonderful show. And looking forward to seeing you in person and in Trinidad for Carnival 22, 23, 24, or whenever next we have.
On and on, hopefully. Hopefully, yes. But thank you again. It's an honor to have spoken to you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Today, when I look around in the world, what do I see? I see footprints that man have left on the sand while walking through time. I see fruits of our ambitions, segments of our imaginations, and I ask myself, when will it end? When will it end? It is plain to see, universally this land is not bountiful as it was, simply because in his quest for success, nothing stands in man's way. All rivers run dry, soon the birds will fly, the mountains will be no longer high. And when I really think of it, I just wonder why, oh why. I see charity deplored, equal rights totally ignored, wisdom and ingenuity working in accord, simply to afford such inventions as thermonuclear warfare and environmental warfare. And I wonder now, where do we go from here? Prophets everywhere gaze upon the horizon and declare that judgment will come as the savage hands of unscrupulous men defile everything passed by. Time is running out as we eat and drink, species at the brink of being extinct. And I think no one can deny that the price of progress is high, real high. I see consciousness as great as today we live recklessly. Money make egos inflate and thereby create a turbulent state. I see a struggle between the sexes, new hang-ups and old complexes. Now the question is, right in context, what shall be next? I've already seen this would have come divided between race, color, creed and class. And some of the things the scripture predicts truthfully come to pass. Soil that wouldn't bear children, making children to be a part of this growing mass. And I ask, if this is progress, how long will it last?